So I'm joining from Yagara country up here. I think that's right. I usually join from Gubby country over on the Sunshine Coast, but I'm out at Kaminya. And I'll give you a quick overview of what Tyson is as a company. It's not known to many people in Australia. I'll do that first, and then I'll begin to explain genuinely what it is we're trying to achieve in sustainable meat and sustainable food, and how that reflects and comes down the supply chain, especially to producers, and the role that NRM groups possibly need to play in us being able to tell the sustainability story of food production to the consumer. So we have a sustainability program called the Formula to Feed the Future. And it's effectively understanding that as Tyson's the world's second largest protein company, we play a very important role in moving protein sustainability and protein availability to a growing population. And especially as we look at the WHO guidelines of 50 grams of protein a daily, we're going to need to do more to get that to 10 billion by 2050 without it having an additional cost on the planet and the communities. And it's a really complex situation. We play, if you look chronologically at beef production, which is one of the biggest ones that we work in. We also work in chicken and pork. Chronologically, we hold the product for one of the smallest periods of time in the supply chain. Our footprint is also one of the smallest in terms of both land and environmental greenhouse gas footprints of the companies along that supply chain because of the scale and efficiency at which we operate. But it's a big number when looked at on its own. But when you combine that footprint to the consumer and where the consumer is making a choice, it means we need to work together to find the solutions in reducing that footprint. And for us to sell a sustainable product to a consumer, we're going to need to work with a lot of people. So that starts with our team members and our shareholders who help drive this, especially our shareholders, probably a few steps ahead of our customers right now, and far ahead of our consumers currently, are our shareholders in guiding us, in pressuring us towards sustainability. The farmers and ranchers are obviously the key. When we look at both our land and greenhouse gas footprints, not only are they the largest there, but the positive operations, the positive stories we can tell about landscape management around community engagement are also with our farmers and ranchers. We are the largest employer in most of the communities we operate in, so our communities are really important. And we lean on NGOs a lot for advice and guidance around what threats, challenges, and solutions are. We're beginning to engage a lot more with our customers and consumers, and we have some customers that are really engaged, some not, some that are coming on board, and it's similar with consumers. There's a leading edge of consumers that are making choices now, and then there'll always be a more price-conscious consumer. But how do we allow them to do that in a way that doesn't have an impact either? We obviously have some pretty strong business operations around this, and sustainability is now one of the key pillars of our business operations. And then it's our supply chain partners, who moves our product, who stores our product, who buys it for us in places where we buy it secondary. So it's a broad range of stakeholders, and each of those steps need to be doing something that aligns to our end goals for us to be able to tell the story. And I'll get to some of the challenges that arise because of that diversity soon. And Tyson it's a big company. So we process around 155,000 head of cattle a week, 461,000 pigs. The numbers go up astronomically when you start dealing with chicken. We sell into 145 countries, and we work in 8 countries and 5 continents with our operations. So as Director of Sustainability in the International Business Unit, everything outside the US sits in my domain. So those 7 countries and 4 continents that I lead our work on sustainability, predominantly Asia, and Tyson recently purchased this plant here in Kaminya as part of an Asian purchase. And here, most of what we do is produce beef patties for McDonald's. So it's about 90% of our business here. We move around 100 tonne of beef a day through this plant, making it into burger patties. But around the rest of the International Business Unit, we do that, but we also vertically integrated chicken and pork production as well. So we have a clear set of solution and priorities, and we've really tried to bring this down to a small number of targets that are easily communicated, not just externally in terms of gaining recognition for it, but also in our supply chain, so that we're engaging with our suppliers and partners on a smaller range of topics, so that they're actually more willing and able to engage on single topics rather than giving them a broad, 30-page survey, which we often get. So we talk a lot about safety, EI&D, and our workforce engagement, etc. Really important piece of work happening there. Protecting our planet, conserving natural resources. Those, they're the key sustainability issues that we talk about, and they're the most visible ones. When most people talk about sustainability, they tend to think of the environmental issues. But to achieve some of these things, we've set some specific targets around innovating with smart, responsible agriculture through animal welfare, land stewardship, our forest protection survey. We're going to need to innovate in that space to do that. Our supply chain resiliency, understanding that there's, growing severe weather impacts that we're going to have to deal with. So maintaining supply chain resiliency, but then also this agricultural education development space. How do we partner more directly with producers and those who are training producers to meet our needs in producing the products? So we can skip over this slide in the number of time. It sort of details a few of the same specific targets, and Kate, you can feel free to share these slides. There's some of the specific targets we have. Big note there, and the one I'm going to focus on soon, is this reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 30% by 2030. That is a science-based target. So if you haven't heard of an organisation called the Science-Based Target Initiative, that is about setting targets that actually align our business towards a 2-degree future. We're currently going through a re-baseline of that, so that'll actually come back to a 1.5-degree future now. It'll be really interesting for those of us who work a lot in beef, and beef is by far our largest emissions source, whether or not that number changes, because the new rules also allow for us to account for methane differently. So it's going to be an interesting process over the next couple of months as we get a new baseline, as we head towards 1.5 degrees rather than 2 degrees. So we're going to reduce our emissions. It's a gross emissions target. So with business growth, that'll be very challenging, except for scope 3, which is an intensity target. We're going to promote sustainable material use, doing a lot of work around packaging, moving to zero waste to landfill. In fact, this plant here in Kaminia is the only manufacturing site in Australia that's already zero waste to landfill. And then implement forest-friendly practices throughout our value chain. That's one of the key issues that we have, and no doubt those of you who've worked in Queensland will know around deforestation-free supply chains and the issues. But for us, purchasing soy and packaging from around the world, it's a truly global effort to try and reduce the impact on forest of our supply chain. So as I said, we have a science-based target to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We also have a reduce of water intensity target by 12%. That was by 2020. What we've done now, instead of just come up with an arbitrary number across our operations, is move towards setting contextual water targets. And this is where I think NRM groups in particular are going to play a role for us. We have identified across our supply chains at-risk water catchments, both now and moving into the future. And one of those is the Brisbane catchment, where we draw our water directly out of Waivano Dam. So what we have to do is set a contextual water target, a target that actually aligns to all of the challenges that are being faced in this specific region. So population growth, water quality, community engagement. So over the next few months, especially, and I'll be talking to Bruce Lord in particular about this, how do we engage in community efforts and understand what's needed for our supply chain in this water catchment contextually to set new targets for water. It's a far better way of doing it. It's a far more rigorous way of doing it. It's a far more costly way of doing it for us, but I think it drives far bigger outcomes. It's also clearly understood by our shareholders and investors as well. The greenhouse gases, we've got a bit of work to do there, particularly in scope 3. Our scope 1 and 2, we know what the pathways are. It's efficiency and moving to renewables in plants. But our scope 3 emissions, engaging with farmers, we're going to need to find ways. Firstly, what are the credible ways of reducing emissions at production level? But then how do we tell that story through a supply chain in a way that meets international rules? The big challenge I see that's currently happening, and I spent 10 years as an extension officer, and a lot of what we do is focus on helping farmers do the best they can do. Then we do a little bit more about telling that story. That's generally fact sheets, and it's never really successfully given to the customer or consumer. What we have to start doing is moving sustainability claims through supply chains in a similar way to what we do with provenance. So knowing where products are, using technologies like and industry systems like NLIS to start moving some of these sustainability claims, greenhouse gas footprints, for example, and there may be others, biodiversity credits, forest status on farm, that should start to move with the animal through the supply chain. So that when we're able to tell the story to a consumer, it comes with a credible claim to it that's moved through supply chain in a credible way. And I think linking of some of that on-farm measurement of greenhouse gas, biodiversity benefits, forest status needs to be more aligned to the international ways of accounting that the corporates are having to use. Because currently there's great work happening, but it doesn't move the needle for us. And if it doesn't move the needle for us, then we're not able to sell it into the markets as product meeting those requirements. And I'll skip this one too. You guys will know basically where our emissions come from. It's livestock in particular. Operations, water operations are bigger than transport for us, but livestock in particular, and not just grain, but the livestock themselves. So we do work with a number of people to make sure what we're doing meets international guidelines. So you'll see there the science-based targets. You'll see there the World Resources Institute, which helped develop the contextual water targets system. Also work with the Environmental Defence Fund, and there's others, Global Roundtable, Sustainable Beef, and others that help us, the accountability framework on forests. All these systems help us do things in a way that we know will meet expectations. Because one of the big risks is we do some really great work, but it's not trusted, or it's not understood, or it's not able to be communicated simply. And there's a real confusion with the customer. The customer loves these things, but unless you can tell them about it in 3 seconds when they're looking at a packet in store, you're not going to win them over. So there is an important role for smart certification and verification of these claims, or accurate measuring and transporting of that measurement through a supply chain. You know, at some point, we're probably going to want to communicate the greenhouse footprint of our products, whether it be on pack or to the customer. We're going to need to know that number. That's going to need some accurate tracking through the supply chain. And what I might do is I might skip over a bit of this animal welfare stuff. We started 15 minutes late. Obviously, we house a lot of birds. We don't own feedlots, so we don't own cattle, but we do have some vertically integrated pork operations. So animal welfare, it's also one of the key risks for us in terms of public exposure, and one of those really acute risks that can move quite quickly. So we follow a lot of rules, but we also need to collaborate with people to make sure that we're doing this at scale. So one of the risks, as I touched on earlier, is if we went to each of those partners on that earlier slide with a specific way of doing things, a specific way of measuring carbon, a specific way of measuring biodiversity, and it was just a Tyson way, that would lock in a farmer to measure it that way at cost and then into our supply chain. So, you know, selling to us would potentially come at a cost, or if they did that, selling to someone else would then require additional cost. So working with the roundtables, and the one you don't see on here is the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework, it's really important that we work with contemporaries and potentially more conventionally competitors in this space and our customers to ensure that we're asking the questions in the same way. And there's an important message there for those of you who work with farmers on the ground, that you're also hearing that information from groups like the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework, or even engaging at a slightly higher level with some of the global reporting frameworks, so that the farmers are beginning to capture and share the information that's needed for us to be able to then tell the story to customers, consumers, and investors in the industry. Because there is a severe risk, and we've seen it, in a number of different systems already. If you look at certified grass-fed and the systems that different abattoirs run for certified grass-fed, if you look at certified carbon neutral claims by different supply chains, some of them require very detailed amounts of information. That capturing them comes at a cost, and then potentially locks you into that supply chain. So there's a need to collaborate at scale here. And it may not always be seen by some who do play competitively in this space see a benefit in moving that way. Some don't. But if it comes from the ground up, and I think some of the efforts by groups like the SFOs, AgForce, for example, in ag care, if those programs align to reporting frameworks, etc., then they can provide real value in helping farmers sell their products to a range of customers with a simple slate of, or a simple dashboard of sustainability criteria. And this is happening at scale. And it's happening in different parts of the world. So we do see products out there, and these products do a number of things for us. One, they prove that it's possible. Two, they test the market. Is the market responsive to sustainability claims and metrics? And I'll differentiate the markets there. If I look at the red meat industry claim by 2030, that if you look at the way that target's used in policy discussions here in Australia, it's really positive, as it has been internationally. I know when I was with WWF, we had MLA representatives speak on WWF stages at Climate Week in New York, Climate COP in Poland. The Brazilians have launched a carbon neutral beef, but it's a really interesting way of doing it. It's an agroforestry system. And then Ireland has promised to be the market for sustainable food, the global market. So they want 100% of food exports verified sustainable by the end of this decade. That's a big move, but they see it as positioning Ireland credibly and robustly in a place where some countries have already got it. If you look at New Zealand kind of has that moniker around the world now, based more off tourism campaigns possibly than actually numbers on the ground, but they have it, and they're moving towards making that more robust. But Ireland is probably ahead of the world in that space. And then there's a really important space for us, especially in animal proteins, to engage in places where there are some sort of vested interests starting to change policy settings. If we don't get numbers right, and these numbers aren't just about farmers' impact, it has to be the whole industry, because we are effectively, when viewed from the outside, the beef industry from plate to grave, from farm to plate, is the one industry. So we do need to ensure we're doing it together and engaging constructively. So we'll have staff at United Nations Climate Change Conference in Egypt in a couple of weeks. They'll be back again at the Biodiversity COP in Montreal a couple of weeks after that. And we do need to engage constructively and use especially the farmer voice, because the farmer voice is a very trusted voice. It comes from a place that represents community and culture as well. So using the farmer voice in those forums is really important. So I'll let you, you can certainly head to tysonsustainability.com to learn more. I'm happy now to take some question and answer, but I think that the key message I want to put forward is when you're doing things on farm, especially when you're dealing with measurement of positive outcomes for nature, for climate, for water on farm, is how are those numbers relating to some of those key reporting frameworks? And are you linking into supply chains that therefore can use those numbers to create a premium product or create premium awareness of a product? We want to do that. We want to do more of that. We're setting up projects here in Australia right now, and no doubt, Bruce Lord, I'm in your neck of the woods in the next few weeks. I want to talk to you about trying to set up a project where we can pilot how we bring climate, biodiversity and water metrics through a supply chain, because we've got a customer in McDonald's that wants to know about the beef in every box, not just about, broad industry initiatives. So we need some more of that credible data coming through the supply chain, and it's going to have to, we've tried starting it from this end. It needs to come more from the ground up towards the market, and not so much in a defensive way of saying the market should just buy our product, it's sustainable. It needs to come in a way that here are the numbers, you can tell the consumers about our product.
Thanks, Kate.